So when we look at the difference really between term and perm, sometimes I look at it, something that we may be more familiar with, which is like renting versus owning a house. Are there benefits to each? Yes. Is one right and the other is wrong? Absolutely not. It depends on your situation. What do I mean by that? Well, what are some of the benefits of renting, Mr. and Mrs. Client? Well, the short-term costs are low. What do I mean by the short-term costs? You get in for first and last and you're in, right? You've got a high degree of what I would call flexibility. At the end of the lease, you can pick up and go. What are some of the downsides of renting? Well, I would suggest that the long-term costs are high. What do you mean the long-term costs are high? Well, year after year, you have to keep re-renting or releasing. And over a period of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, it's highly likely your costs are going to go up each and every year or the majority of those years. So your long-term costs are high. You have no equity, no matter how long you rent for, and there's no tax benefits, no matter how much you pay or how long you rent for. Is that true or not true? Great. So now let's look at owning. What are the benefits of owning? The benefits of owning are the long-term costs are actually lower. Well, what do I mean by the long-term costs are lower? Well, let's say you get a 30-year fixed loan and you just make your monthly mortgage payments every month for 30 years. Okay, let's say, for example, let's say that mortgage payment is $2,000 a month. Well, 10 years from now, even though you're still paying $2,000 a month, one, because of inflation and the value of the dollar, that $2,000 a month 10 years from now will not be worth the same amount of purchasing power as it is today. The same is true 20 years out and 30 years out. The second thing to consider is it's highly likely 10 years from now and 20 years from now that your income will go up. So proportional to your family's income and your budget, that mortgage payment will be less and less of your family's budget. Third, at the end of 30 years, you pay off your mortgage, you own that property free and clear. So the long-term costs are much lower for ownership, and there's tremendous tax benefits to own. And you can build equity over time by owning. What's the downside of owning? Well, the short-term costs are higher. Why? You got to come up with a down payment and closing costs and escrow and termites and appraisal and all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't have to if you rented. And what is the other downside is there's limited flexibility. In other words, you buy a house, 6 months later, a year later, you may not be able to sell it and move. You're probably the closing costs will probably be too much for you to leave that quickly. So there's much less flexibility when you own. I would say the same features and benefits and the same liabilities are true of term insurance and permanent insurance. Term insurance, the short-term costs are low and it's highly flexible. You can cancel whenever you want. But the long-term costs are higher and there's no equity and there's no tax benefits. Permanent life insurance, the short-term costs are higher and there's limited flexibility because it's a permanent policy. However, the long-term costs are lower. There's significant tax benefits utilizing a permanent policy, and you can build tremendous equity in one of these policies. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions about that? Does that help?